Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to yet another episode. As always, I have a very interesting guest, and today is definitely no exceptions. I have Dr. Ann Gillies. She is a PhD and she specializes in complex traumatic stress from sexual abuse. She's a retired psychotherapist, and in terms of what's happening in our culture today and what is happening in our schools, I think Dr. Ann has a ton of knowledge and a ton of insight. I'm very excited to have her on the show. Dr. Ann, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure, David. Thank you. Yes, I've been on this road for a long time in research and then certainly advocating in the last several years for our children because they're the ones who are really being targeted and they're the most vulnerable. That and in fact, the most vulnerable of our children are very susceptible to some of the things happening in our education system, and that are really it's gone way past education because this is entered way into indoctrination, which is really changing the neurological pathways in the brains of our children. So it's something that we need to really talk about, and parents need to be aware of. Most parents, send their children to school as I did, unknowingly, unwittingly, expecting that they would learn reading, arithmetic, science, history, all those kind of things. And now they're being inundated with an ideology that is very damaging.
Absolutely. And, I got to say, I was one of those parents right up until last year when I saw a delegation from a formal teacher, Carolyn Brajowski, exposing the types of books that are in the school system. And I've been looking into it and I couldn't believe what I was finding. And that's how I got started on this journey. Now, you've had a very interesting career as well. When did you kind of notice what is happening in our school systems? And you're quite outspoken about it. So, can you give a
Um,
little bit of insight?
well, I mean, even my youngest son, who's 31 now, he had said, when he was in high school, there were some things like some of the sex education became um, more than just the birds and the bees kind of thing. It was more instructional into the area of LGBT inclusivity, but that really didn't ramp up um, to the stage it is now. It started really ramping up about 2015, and then over COVID, I think it's really even uh, accelerated even more. But I talk about all this in actually a book I wrote. It was published in 2017 called Closing the Floodgates. And so I track how we got from 1948 to how we got to here now. And so I've been watching this, I've been talking about it. It's interesting, David, because just really in the last year, I am finally seeing churches and parents starting to go, wait a minute, this really is happening. And so I'm really encouraged by that. I wish that people would have awakened earlier. Of course, that's always our wish, right? But we trusted our educational system, we trusted our government. It turns out that that's a blind trust, and unfortunately that there are and some people would say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. No, you are no longer a conspiracy theorist when what you are talking about and have talked about for years and years is actually happening. This is a reality, folks. And so yes, so I've certainly spoken out. I have some good friends that have spoken out a long time on this. Actually, one is Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson, and her and I actually, gosh, I guess it was about 2018, were talking about all of these things, and she was very, very concerned. And it was kind of like a wake-up call to her. Her children were grown as mine were, but it was just like, this is happening in our schools. I can't believe it. And the more you delve, the worse it looks. And since 2018, it really has gotten far more obvious and prolific. And unfortunately, the principals and teachers are advocating for this because they have gone through programs that are called sensitization programs. In 2017, 2018, I remember talking to a teacher and she said, yeah, we have to go through these sensitization programs. And I'm thinking, sensitizing to what? And so she's telling me, and I'm thinking that this is desensitization. It's so that you will no longer have any kind of moral code to govern you by. And that's really what's happened. Mhm.
Well, it's crazy. Like the lack of direction right now in the schools is basically entrenching these kids into this gender ideology. And the direction that they are pushing is towards this transgenderism and sexual acceptance. And it's almost like they have these ironic names, where you can love yourself and all of this, but it's really a rejection of oneself, what I find. And especially what they're pushing with the trans, actually celebrating it. Uh, these procedures that kids are pushed towards have lifelong physical and psychological ramifications, and a dependence on drugs, and everybody needs to constantly affirm. And this is exactly what we're seeing. And they're sold as life-saving procedures, and anybody who doesn't want to participate is causing genocide. And the government went as far as offering, starting June, $75,000 to help transition people. So this is costing people money, taxpayer money, and anybody who doesn't want to participate is viewed as phobic and a bigot. Now, obviously, there are big problems with this because it's pushed on kids, pushed on minors, and a lot of sexual conversations happening in schools. That's what I found, is constant soliciting minors. What is your sexuality? And that is a problem because I don't think minors are sexual. And if a minor has any sexual preferences, I believe that's a red flag. There's something that happened and he was exposed to some sexual behavior. But now, because all minors are talking about it, like you mentioned, the ones who are vulnerable end up falling through the cracks because you cannot tell the difference between the people who are actually abused and the people who are just having normal talk.
You nailed it. And that is really, really difficult for therapists now. And as a trauma therapist, I mean, it was pretty not easy, but I mean, you knew the signs to look for if a child had been sexually abused, and teachers were taught even to watch for some of these signs. Now we don't do that. Well, I don't know if they're taught to look for the signs, but what the children are seeing and viewing in the classroom is actually pornographic. And so their brains are already they're consuming a lot of information that young minds are not ready to receive and should not. And some of the information they don't need to even be told until they're out of school. Quite honestly, it's stuff that we really don't need to know. And what people do as adults, I mean, they're free to do that, but leave our kids alone. And some of the things, and so when you're talking about this, just what's happened last week in my own riding municipality and our own schools is the Get Real movement showed up. Now, I didn't know anything about this movement. And so I was unaware. I was in Vancouver speaking when this all came to light. And I thought, I was told that it was drag queens, and that just, kind of got me woke up. Posted a quick video, which I had to say, no, it's not drag queens, actually. It's the Get Real movement. But, the Get Real movement is the umbrella movement with the LGBTQ activists, and drag queens are under that umbrella. So whether there was a drag queen at the school or not really doesn't change the perspective of the movement. And one of the things, and I can share this if you like, is on that, or you can share it later, whichever is easy for you, that on the Get Real website, so it's thegetrealmovement.com for your viewers. If you look under resources, you'll find gender joy. And under gender joy are all kinds of I would say apparatus for children. They're selling these. I can put a screen share on very quickly if you like, and
Hmm.
just where is it here? I'll just share this very quickly with you and with your viewers. And it's called Born This Way Summit. See, here's the gaslighting. There is no born this way. We have been manipulated for 50, well, more than 50 years into believing as a culture that born this way is a truth. And it is not true. It is not true, and it has been scientifically refuted by really, really high class researchers who are themselves gay and lesbian. I mean, they have beseech the LGBT group to stop using this line because it's not true, because they have now decided that we all are sexually fluid, which, you know, of course we are. We can do whatever we want. But because that's so much been ingrained in our culture, this born this way mantra, that now here we have the Get Real movement. That means they're saying that gender dysphoric children, aka the new term, it is transgender. It is not a psychological term. It's a political term. It is it's actually very, very damaging. Anyways, that these children are born that way. This is an absolute lie. But when you look at what they are doing here on the Get Real Movement website, there's this right off their website. So they are selling all of these things to young children. So they're presenting their stuff in the schools. And what happened in our local schools is that they talked about their stories, how bullied they were, how those kind of things. And I've heard back from a few children, and that was in our high school too. And the high school students have said to me, oh, it was disgusting. I wish I'd never shown up for class. And other students said, when they got into the auditorium, that they were not allowed to leave the auditorium. Interestingly enough, here's the other thing: parents were not allowed in the schools to witness this. They could not go in to the school, blocked out of their own schools, their children's schools. We're taxpayers, for goodness sakes. So they're not allowed in. And the principal said, well, this is a curriculum material. No, it's not. It's not curriculum material. We are paying, taxpayers are paying these individuals that speak $300 a day. It's on their website. That's how much they get for talking. This isn't out of the goodness of their heart. And this is indoctrination. And look what they're doing. You know, promoting these things. It's so damaging. And at the bottom of this, I'll scroll up a bit so you can see this. We believe that affirming gear also acts as harm reduction. No, this is harmful. Putting a binder on young women is harmful. There are all kinds of risks to these things, all of these other things. And of course, it leads then to so you go from social transforming, well, whatever, to puberty blockers, and then you go on to hormones. This is the trajectory. And those drugs, if you stay on those drugs, you will be infertile. And the hormones that they're injecting, testosterone, into young women is literally, I want to say this because one detransitioner said this on a video. She said, it just made me crazy. It made me crazy. And so my understanding is that in order to balance hormones in a female body that is unbalanced, their hormones are unbalanced, and we do have to sometimes balance those things, that 0.2 milligrams topically per day. And then what they are doing, what the doctors are giving young women is 50 to 100 milligrams of testosterone a week. Wow, this is radical. This detransitioner that we were interviewing, they started her, and it's intramuscular, started her on 250 milligrams per week, 250. And she said it just about drove her crazy. And what testosterone does in the body, it creates all kinds of anger and frustration and in a female body. They're not used to it. You know, little boys grow up with testosterone. Of course, it hits the peak in puberty, right? But all of those things, they learn how to deal with all of the emotional ramifications. It's a created order. And so when you do this synthetically into young women, you're finding, and we're seeing this in the transgender community, that, and I'll call them cross-sex identifying community, because transgender is really, what is that? It doesn't mean anything. It used to be transsexual. The language, of course, has been so hijacked. But these young girls who are now cross-sex identifying have all this built-up rage, just absolute anger, and it is coming out. It's funneled to come out against you and I. Anyone who would dare suggest that maybe they should check into this more, maybe they should do something, like, we're really concerned for you. So parents are just being absolutely traumatized. Parents and grandparents, they don't know what to do. What do we do with these young people that are absolutely emotionally out of control? This is such a horrendous thing that we are doing to our children. Anyway, sorry, that was a tirade.
Yeah, 100%. And like at the Waterloo District School Board, where I'm at, we have a policy AP 1235. And in that policy, it states that any child that transitions, the staff should not tell the parents because it might bring harm to the child. So they're positioning the parents as harmful to the child. But then just below that, it encourages the student to talk to any staff member, administrator, counselor, basically anybody at school, and they say, we encourage you to talk and think about the benefits of talking. So in my opinion, this is the first step of grooming secrets and keeping parents out of the equation. And I believe this is sexual grooming because, first of all, it's sexuality based, and they're trying to get people comfortable with their sexuality, trying to get minors comfortable with their sexuality and with the sexual acts, with the sexually explicit books that are there, and keeping all of this stuff, and once a child decides to socially transition at school, they bring in organizations like Get Real. And I've seen OK to Be Me is another organization, a counseling organization. And I've seen students come out of a school and they had pride flags tattooed on their faces and purple OK to Be Me goodie bags. And OK to Be Me also refers these transitioning students to doctors to get medical procedures. And over here, I've seen a pamphlet that they hand out. They say on that pamphlet, in order to have upper body surgery, you only need as little as a nurse. Like the bar to go in is so low. And then if you want bottom surgery, you need 2 nurses. And basically, it makes it extremely, extremely easy to get these surgeries with lifelong ramifications. You got risk of infection, you got nerves being chopped, genitals being altered and mutilated, and we're celebrating this as empowering behavior. How did we get to this place, and what kind of gaslighting are the students and the parents being put through?
Oh my, yeah. Everything, David. And now I hadn't heard about the nurses. That's really interesting. Not unexpected with the way it's going. Just wanted to comment on a couple things there that you were saying about these children. These children, yes, what's damaging is the actual indoctrination itself, and putting these thoughts into a child's mind. You were talking about them, recognizing their own sexuality, but it's so much more than that, because we are demanding they recognize and embrace every form of sexual behavior, everything. Which, I mean, to me, this is what I believe, that this is all of this grooming. Everything is leading these children to the acceptance of pedophilia, because pedophiles, and all of this is really ramping up in the whole orientation debate, and it has been for several years. In 2014, in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, there was a push by psychologists and psychiatrists who are very much involved in pedophilic behavior. They totally agree with it. Anyways, to have pedophilia removed from the DSM and listed as an orientation. Now, hence, when we think of orientation, we think of homosexual orientation. Once it leaves a mental illness diagnosis, it then becomes legal. And so this will mean, and that was in 2014. So when the manual is rewritten again, I fully expect that pedophilia will become an orientation. And whatever you feel about a lesbian, gay, bisexual, most people say, okay, well, they're adults, whatever. But when it comes to pedophilia, this is a whole different ballgame. And there's so much we can unpack here, because what you said is right. They're grooming the children, but they're lying, absolutely lying to these children about the whole transitioning, well, from beginning to end. And why I say that is because from a research perspective, the research that I'll put that side wants to provide us with is most often it has methodological errors of bias. Like, there's just so many errors, but it's promoted as absolute truth. It's like everything in the media. And the reality is that, so there was a 30-year Swedish longitudinal study, and what they found was so this is on transitioned adults after they had transitioned, so for many years, and they found elevated rates of suicide, 19% higher than the controls, which were the regular individuals, and 19% higher. And this is after transitioning. You see, and the Dutch study, I think, said, I better not quote the percentage, but after 10 years after a sexual reassignment surgery, the suicide rate just went kind of off the grid. It just went way up. You see, there's a honeymoon period when these children go on the puberty blockers, and then they do the cross-sex stuff for a little bit, the hormones, and they lop off their breasts. We're seeing, 13-year-olds go this route, and then by the time they're 23, they're going, oh my goodness, what have I done to my body? I am mutilated. I am scarred for life. And if they've had bottom surgery, oh my goodness, there's so many complications, boys and girls. So they've lied. The scientific community has lied consistently about what happens to these young children. And we had good research previously, and particularly in Toronto, Dr. Ken Zucker treated gender dysphoric, they were called gender identity disordered children, and they were diagnosed, number one, which our children aren't. They're not diagnosing. Teachers are saying, oh, you must be something other than you really are. This is ridiculous. Anyways, so I lost my train of thought there, but these children, between 88 and 97% of them could be treated successfully, and they would never go through all of this horrific transitioning. By the time they hit puberty, most of these children, I mean, a huge percentage of them were happy in their own bodies. We
Well,
left them
yeah,
alone, right? And now this is all about big pharma medicalizing our children. They're on drugs for life. They won't be able to afford it because, they've spent their teen years not learning how to work and how to get employed and all of those things. They're going to be living on the streets because they won't even be able to pay for the hormones. It's just mind-boggling.
absolutely. And I believe that the lie starts right from the beginning when they say that these kids, their gender is assigned at birth. Like the
Oh,
doctor doesn't observe it, he kind of has a hunch when they're born. It's like, well, 50-50 chance I'm going to go with boy or girl. Or if the doctor's unsure, it's neither, which is absolute garbage.
but what I wanted to say about that, David, and I'm going to correct you here, because this is part of the language deconstruction. It They don't have a gender at birth; they have a sex. They are not assigned. This is, yeah, it's just, it really fires me up because these children are biologically male or female. The whole assignment stuff is all of this propaganda that we have consumed and believed. And because we have use the word gender, the media uses it. I hear pastors from the pulpit using gender instead of sex. Gender is a social construct. It just simply means the way you express either your femininity or masculinity. It's not your sex. But you see, if we can blur the lines, right? It's all about blurring everything, confusing everybody, making them learn all these new terms. Our children have to learn all these new terms. They don't have the time to learn normal things. They've got to learn all these pronouns and all of these things that are just ludicrous, and it's so sad. And I'm not trying to demean any young child that is having concerns about their sexuality. That's a normative experience for every single individual, and we need to start speaking truth to these children because it is kind and loving to tell them the truth and to let them know that there is a normalcy of growing up, of going through puberty, and it's okay. It's okay. You don't have to try to be someone you don't or somebody you emulate. You want to be a man, but you don't have to do that. You can be a woman and still enjoy life and do lots of things. You can skateboard, you can do, but these children have been so well, indoctrinated into believing that they have to change their sex in order to, fit in. And not only that, we're talking about children who have already 3 to 5 pre-existing mental conditions before they start transitioning. Not only that, up to 26% of them are on the autism spectrum. This is child abuse at its highest level. They are preying on the most vulnerable among us. So the most vulnerable are our children. The most vulnerable of the children are those who have pre-existing mental health concerns or and Asperger's and autism are mental health issues. They also have a biological component, which the whole transgender does not. Anyways, you get me going, and sorry, I kind of take off on that, but yeah, it's just been it's horrific what we're doing to our children, what we're
Been look,
allowing done.
yeah, I've been looking into this whole suicide thing and seeing why it's elevated rates. Now, in psychology, this is called scapegoating, where you blame somebody else for the wrongdoings of another group. And parents are being blamed, and anybody that speaks out is being blamed for the high suicide rates, when in fact, I believe that the suicide rates are because of these internal problems that these kids are having.
Yes.
So I know my friend was telling me about this couple. It was two girls that were dating, and she said they had all sorts of like mental health problems,
Yes.
and even just accepting themselves. And if you can't accept yourself and you're trying to force other people, then you kind of get pushed back, and you also feel alone, right? Because first of all, you can't accept yourself and you don't know where your relationship is going, and everybody seems to be against you. It feels like the world is against you. And I mean, there's a biological component to that because people will try not to affirm you. I mean, normal people will try to be honest with you.
Mhm.
I think affirmation is enabling bad behavior. And I think that compassion and empathy are being weaponized to enable this kind of behavior. But going back to these suicide rates, when you push sexuality to be an identity, and when things start changing and that's not the case, I think people really do feel like their world is collapsing. So in the case of this couple, uh, they identified as lesbians, and then one of them started transitioning
Mm.
to become male, and the other one was kind of going through this crisis of, well, what are we now? Like, I thought I was a lesbian because that's how I identified, right? And it's like, am I really attracted to males now? Like, what's happening in our relationship? And for the other one, it's like she couldn't accept that she was a girl, you know, and you hear about like all this, you hear it on both sides, toxic femininity, toxic masculinity. So you think one sex is better than the other. And then you try to transition to kind of get away with that. Um, and it put this couple in a crisis because they didn't know. Like the one girl seeing her girlfriend in this transition didn't know if she was a lesbian anymore and couldn't cope with the fact that now she might be straight. So then
It's
she ended up transitioning as well. And now she can have her gay it went from like lesbian to straight to gay, and it's like really confusing and very unstable, and one of them ended up committing suicide. And this
oh,
is not because people were against it. This is because they can't accept themselves, and they really need help. And kids should not be pushed into this. I don't know if you have any insight on why these high rates of suicides are happening and the mentality behind them.
absolutely. Well, here we have it's a classic example of what's happening. It's repeated multiple times across our nation. We're seeing so lesbians in particular, where one is transitioning into a male in an attempt to make, you know, kind of um, normal, what we would have called, a male-female relationship. It's just kind of mind-boggling. It kind of goes, whoa. But then you see the crisis that comes because of all of this, exactly what you said. You said it really well, not accepting who you are as a person. And you see, we have gone from this place of looking at sex as a behavior to to pushing that sex is an identity, and this is just absolutely stupid. And what we're doing is we're annihilating our young people, one way or another, and they believe the lie. So then what do? Like you're saying, this girl said, well, I thought I was a lesbian. Well, um your sexually, you're behaving like a lesbian, but does that make you? See, this is the language. We don't have to be anything but who we are, and how we have sex is should be a behavioral issue. Anyways, what you're talking about suicide though is this. As a trauma therapist, when I see and hear all that's going on, and when I talked about the 3 to 5 pre-existing mental health conditions that these children have before they start socially and then medically transitioning, they often, and this is with the whole LGB group, they have high rates of sexual abuse in childhood, chronic sexual abuse. But they don't want to, nobody wants to talk about this anymore. Nobody wants to help them anymore deal with the root causes, because we just have to accept their sexuality. Well, maybe they would like to have some help with some of the other issues, because and this just isn't in the trans community, but the homosexual and lesbian community, violence is way off the chart compared to heterosexual couples. Nobody's talking about this. I mean, police know how many domestic calls they get to homosexual homes where there's a couple. That's often the reason that these men are changing partners so often, because of the violence. Nobody's talking about any of this. Nobody wants to actually get to the root and deal with the roots. So these children have lots of pre-existing mental health. They have deep trauma issues. They've had adverse childhood effects. They could have, probably most of them have insecure attachments. We have all of this stuff. And instead of dealing with that, the teachers are allowed to say, oh, I think actually you're a girl in a boy's body, so you should transition. We are going to be picking up the pieces of devastated and broken lives for decades, because these children, as they become adults, their life expectancy, for instance, in the homosexual community, their life expectancy is 20 years shorter than the average heterosexual man. Nobody talks about it. Why is that? Well, there's all kinds of things that contribute to that. So with our transgender or cross-sex identifying children, the ramifications, the medical ramifications, the heart attacks and strokes, bone density issues, and then of course the multiple surgeries. One surgery often isn't enough. They go back over and over again. And the pain that they thought they might avoid in puberty, of going both emotional and physical, that they go through, they have actually exasperated exponentially through these surgeries. And then they get to the end saying, why did I ever do that? And they realize, because you cannot medically change a male into a female. You can change a person to look like the opposite sex, but you cannot change their chromosomes. They will always, always, always be born their natal sex. That's it. And so anyways, okay, there I go again.
Absolutely. I'd love to, if you can briefly go over the grooming process, just so parents can understand the difference, because I find the terminology really romanticizes what's happening, because it's almost like they're trying to educate kids, when I believe that this is grooming. Can you talk to me about what constitutes grooming? Because right now it's presented in a positive light of education.
Well, I mean, there you have it, what they're doing. So grooming basically is presenting a child, or I mean, there's different kinds of grooming, because we used to think of grooming in the whole pedophilic perspective, and thinking of people outside of the child's personal friendship. And of course, over the years, we've realized that groomers can be in the home and in our schools or sports or any of those things. But for instance, one thing is that the individual, the groomer, let's talk about this, perceives or tries to encourage the child to believe they're special in some way to the person, the groomer. They are very special. They will spend extra time with this child. They will sometimes buy them things, extra things. Or when I think of the school system, it's a little bit different. Teachers aren't so much doing that, buying them gifts and things. But certainly grandparents and people in friends of parents who actually are grooming children for their own interests will do those kind of things. But what the grooming in the school looks like is presenting children with sexualized pictures and presentations, so that they are actually, and this is what I mentioned earlier, the child begins to accept this is normal. And what is normal now, what is perceived as normal in the school system is amoral. These are the views and values of a very select group of activists who have promoted this, and infiltrated into the educational system in order to groom our children so that they will accept any kind of sexual behavior. And that's what they're trying to do, right? That's the curriculum. And they get real movement. And what did you say it was, okay to
Okay,
be me? Yeah, that's what they're doing. They are presenting these children with all kinds of, it's like candy, isn't it? Like sexual images, sexual experiences track so quickly in the brain. And so it's like, oh, I could be this, I could be that. And they're presenting all of these things in order to actually lower the child's resistance to any kind of sexual interference. And it's so incredible. What we need to be doing with our children is teaching them the right of refusal of any kind of sexual interference, including the pornography that's seen in some of these books. And I have a couple of them that I hate to buy them. And one of them, I've got the name. So anyways, I bought it, and my 31-year-old son was staying here, and I took it down to him and just opened it and said, what do you think of these pictures? And he went, oh my goodness, Mom, this is porn. Well, that's for 10-year-olds. Yeah. He was like, oh my goodness. But you see, people aren't aware, parents aren't aware. They're busy with their lives, and I get that. But your children are more important than your work. I'm just going to lay it on the line. They're more important than your career. They're the most important gift you will ever have. And if you don't protect them, who else is going to protect them?
100%. And you actually bring up a really good point. Parents need to participate in their own rescue in this. Everybody needs to participate in their own rescue. And one of the things is maybe some people have the expectations that their kids are going to be okay if they just bury their head in the sand. But when you really think about it, if an adult doesn't have the courage to speak up, that child has no chance. That child is going to go into the school and get absolutely destroyed by this ideology. And even the adults, they're scared to speak up. So you can imagine these kids, I mean, they're not going to say anything. Kids are very impressionable, very agreeable, and they're going to try. If something makes them feel special, they're going to be incentivized to do that. And I really do encourage parents to participate in their own rescue and to start looking into this stuff as well. This is why I've dedicated this YouTube channel to, I follow the school board closely, the contents, the policies, the procedures, the punishments that are given out just to keep people in line and to keep people stuck to this ideology. So you've seen a rise in this kind of behavior in the past few years. And where do you think all of this stuff is coming from? I see a lot of this stuff, from my personal observation, being government funded. I
Mhm.
see the Ministry of Education being involved, and all of this stuff is coming from the top down. I see Justin Trudeau making comments that trans women are women,
Mhm.
done on Women's Day as well. Where do you see this coming from, and how is it, or is it, erasing real women? If you can't define one, how could you define one?
Well, it's erasing both sexes, actually. And as far it's insidious because it goes far above even our prime minister, and he certainly has pushed so much on on Canadians. It's horrific. But we have the UN, really, who is pushing a very, very serious sexual education um, curricula that starts, they want children starting at the very earliest ages to actually be educated in all of the ideological elements of this. So this is really very universal. It's very, very I say insidious. It really is about annihilating childhood and ultimately down the road annihilating humanity, because we are desexualizing people in that sense, cutting off organs, good, useful, healthy organs, so that these children are infertile. And for the most part, gay, lesbian, bisexual do not have children. I mean, some of them will adopt, or some bring children from their heterosexual relationships. But where this is all coming from is it's a global organized, and I guess I'll say strategy to really indoctrinate and change the minds of every individual to accept all of these sexualities as normative. And then where that takes that is into absolute chaos, because there is no then moral constraint of any kind. And we're there. Canada is already there. Well, let me back up. We're not. Those who have drank this and believed all of this are there, and there's a lot of them. But you know what? The vast majority of Canadians, I would say, do not ascribe to these views and values. And that's why we need, as grandparents and parents, to start standing up. Like you said, for our children, you can't expect your child to stand up and to say, well, I don't agree with this. How could they? They're being so bullied. You want to talk about bullying and tactics. This is absolute bullying into a belief system. This is a religion. This is a new religion. And I've been saying this for several months. The new religion is under the LGBTQ umbrella. And I'm not denigrating the individuals. I'm talking about the activists' new religion. And if you don't sacrifice on their altar, then you are canceled. You are vilified. You end up, you're like scum. Well, what I want to say to parents and grandparents, get over being called names. You've got to toughen up a little bit, folks. That's how the intimidation and bullying has gained such inroads in our school system and in our culture. And you know what? Last week, an older lady was even assaulted. These people are very angry. We go in peace and they come at us like in anger. And I mean, I've had rocks and eggs thrown at me, and who was it from? From the trans community. I mean, this is really sad. So let's talk about who's really doing the bullying. Let's talk about the propaganda, the misinformation, and we can all be, we can all be guilty of that at some level. But let's really talk about what is indoctrinated into our children, and the information they are being strategically taught. It's not about just giving a little bit of information here and there. It's in every area of the curriculum, that was part of the whole thing. And now these people are coming into our schools to promote openly their sexual preferences. Well, our children don't need that. And the children I talk to go, this is so gross. I don't know why we have to listen to this. And for the child not to even be allowed to leave the auditorium or whatever, this is abuse. This is abusive and manipulative. And for parents not to be allowed into the school is a crime. These are our children.
Absolutely. Can you, as a psychotherapist, can you just go in a little bit deeper on the manipulative aspect and what makes this manipulation, and a little bit deeper on the abusive aspect? I know that we've talked about this at length, but just clarify what you mean by manipulation and just a couple of tactics that is used to manipulate and then just clarify on the abuse term.
Well, so here's the idea with manipulation, you're really putting suggestions um, out there. And more than that, in this case, you are actually telling a child that you're lying, but presenting it as truth. And so the child begins to question their own sanity, their own, there is something within us that knows truth. It's just so deep within us. And, children have left, the school in tears after being told some of the stuff they're hearing. They're so confused. And so when you have this kind of manipulation happening, it's aimed at confusing the mind. And so that they question everything that's real and are open to then embracing the unreality as fact, the lies. And so the depth of manipulation is horrific because there is no scientific proof and no studies that show that having a child transition is helpful. There are no studies, in fact, the opposite is coming out, that's showing that affirming a child's delusion is good for them. And just recently, well, within the last 3 years, there's been some real, well, I would say kind of turnover in the psychological associations in Finland, in the UK, in Sweden, and most recently in Norway, where they're pulling away from all of the affirmation therapy idea, because affirmation therapy is a part of manipulation, right? You are affirming something that is impossible. It is impossible to make a boy into a girl. It is an impossibility. The only thing you can do is change the outward appearance. And some of the drugs will change some of the muscle structure, but it won't change bone structure and it won't change chromosomes. So that is the depth of the manipulation that I see. It's really like this insaturation of lies that are presented as truth. And because we have chosen, it goes back to the Born That Way. We were talking about that earlier. People believe that to be true. It's not. But that's the kind of manipulation that we have had in our culture. And of course, now it is so prevalent in the school system.
And then the abuse aspect of it.
Oh, well, well, I have such a thing about lying. To lie to a child is abusive. Lying is abusive, and I mean, sometimes we will avoid telling a child something for their own benefit, if there's been something horrendous happen, or someone has died, and you have to process that a little yourself. I mean, there's a time of protectiveness and disclosing things, but what we're doing is actually lying to children, and the abuse that is then rolled out from that lie is that the encouragement, of course, which I talked about, the abuse is now that the children are instructed to abuse their bodies, basically. And we're allowing the medical professionals to abuse physically, to abuse these children. When we get into the sexual aspect, we've lowered the children's resistance to understanding what is normal sexual expression and what is, over the line. And so the child, and I talked about this earlier, the child then doesn't know when to refuse certain touch. This must be okay because, at school they were doing this, and I mean, here's the reality. Children, so young teen boys, are now instructing little boys, and I mean, this is fairly recent information. Little boys, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, on sexual practices. What did we think would happen, folks? We have been teaching them all of these different sexual practices. And so they're doing boy on boy stuff, you know, and here these little boys are being instructed into this. Guess what's happening to their mind? So this is absolutely abusive at every level.
Absolutely. Doctor, and I feel like there's so much stuff that we can talk about. And you have so much insight on this. I think it might warrant another podcast if you would be so kind to join me. But right now, we're kind of running out of time.
That's right.
And I wanted to ask before we wrap it up, um, do you feel like there's anything that you wanted to say that we didn't touch upon on on our conversation?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we leave out all the time are the parents and the grandparents. We leave them out of this conversation because they have been purposely left out. And now we're seeing that even in the schools, right? But they have been left out of the conversation when it comes to anything LGBTQ and whatever queer is. We still have to figure that out. I think it's whatever you identify it as. But anything like that, any kind of viewer value that the parent or grandparent has that might be different than the child means that you are homophobic, transphobic, all of those things. Parents have been bullied into shutting down and shutting up. And what's happened now is that the parents have been so traumatized, they're afraid to say anything because they could lose their child. I mean, this is how insidious this is in our laws and in our political system. It's so awful. And so protecting your child now is dangerous. It is illegal. It is illegal to protect your child from these kind of manipulations. And so parents and grandparents need resources. I'm actually just finishing a book. Well, finishing, I'm on chapter 4. I might have a few more chapters, called Loving Your Non-Conforming Child, and for parents and grandparents. So how do you deal with this child? And when I was talking to someone about it, he said, "Oh, you're writing the Bible." And I'm like, "What?" But we're all non-conforming in one way or another. So how do we love our children and still not lose ourselves and lose our beliefs and values in the midst of it? And how do we then help them develop good views and values? That's what we need to be doing. So I just want to encourage parents and grandparents to keep up the good fight for your children. Love, love, love them. But that doesn't mean that you have to accept everything they say and do.
That's right. Well said, Dr. Ann. Thank you so much once again for joining me. And to all the listeners and the viewers, I hope that you appreciate this kind of information. As you know, this content is censored very hard. And if you made it this far into the video, I want to thank you and I want to encourage you to share it with others. So parents, grandparents, children, everybody knows what's happening in our school systems. And I'm going to be linking Dr. Ann's uh, material, website, and the books. It's all going to be in the description below. And I encourage you to check that out. Also, feel free to check out the other podcasts, one of them with John Uller, which explores the mind of a deviant predator. And I think you're really going to enjoy that. I want to thank you if you stuck around for now. And until next time, take care.